Hello, welcome again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Bob Scarborough.
And we are still the FAIRtax Guys. Open your banner there. There it goes.
These things can make a lot of noise, but the great thing about this, and everybody needs to have one because they can fit in your hip pocket. You can go to a town hall meeting. You can stand behind a candidate that is being interviewed on television, and you can go.
Mm-hmm. Then we should mention FAIRtaxStore.org is where you go to get those things.
Absolutely. Except when you're like me and you're not coordinated to do much more than push a button and you have to scroll a banner, it gets difficult. Anyway, welcome to the program, everybody.
Did you notice it last week and this week too? I've moved back to Alaska.
Yes, I did. And folks, the pictures that Mr. Paxton has up behind him are ones that he took. And they are a glacier in what area of Alaska were you in?
Oh, the Kenai Peninsula. But
there
this is I'm back in Florida now. It's 95 degrees outside, so I figured if I can get a cool breeze off the glacier in the background, I can cool down a little bit.
Right, that's right.
But we need to keep going. We kind of need to keep going here with the same theme we were talking about last week on FAIRtax Power Radio, because how do I get rid of the IRS is still a really popular search theme on the internet with Google and all the other different search engines, that folks have finally woken up to the fact that the law that's going to put 87,000 more IRS, that's more that can fill most college football stadiums. I've seen the meme on Facebook. This stadium is not big enough to hold all of the new IRS agents that are going to be hired, and they're going to come after you because there aren't that many billionaires in the country. So they got to have something to do.
Yeah. And, I was wondering and looked it up, and the Internal Revenue Service has about 80,000 workers already. And they claim that they've lost to attrition over the last 5 years, that they've lost roughly 50,000 employees that range from audit officials, customer service employees.
Yeah. Okay.
I love that term.
When the ones that don't answer the phones and will cut you off if they don't know the answer. But anyway,
we'll be back in 30 years to tell you the answer.
Yeah, we need to keep going on these because people are now more than ever are interested in getting rid of the Internal Revenue Service, something we have been encouraging for years, literally here on FAIRtax Power Radio. Now the population of the country has at least got that on their radar screen now, and we need to tell them there's only one way to do that. That is quit taxing income and start taxing consumption. A flat tax is a flat income tax. That will not get rid of the IRS. The fair tax, HR 25, is actual legislation. It's been in Congress every year since 1999. It has been it's the most well-researched piece of legislation ever. I think I can go out on a limb and say that. But the fair tax is how you get rid of the IRS.
Right. And all that money that's ours. And this is and I've said this in the other show, and I'll say it again because it really strikes home for me as a taxpayer. We're paying a tax that is going to send money to the Internal Revenue Service so they can hire employees and come collect taxes from us.
I'd rather just pay my taxes of my own volition when I buy things at the cash register. So that's exactly what the fair tax does. The fair tax taxes consumption, i.e. spending, not income. And we should also mention that the fair tax does not tax your spending up to the poverty level for your household size. You get that back in a monthly prebate. So you don't take any money out of your pocket until your spending exceeds your poverty level. That's the fair tax prebate. We may have to do another whole show on that. But how you get rid of the IRS is you pass the fair tax. Okay.
And that's right. The whole point of what you just said about the prebate falls short in some of the conversations that people have about it. And they ask that question a lot if they're starting to really dig in, if somebody gets interested in the fair tax as an alternative to the income tax and the Internal Revenue Service, et cetera. And they say, well, how about the people that are living at the poverty level? Or how about working poor, for example, that people work three jobs. And right now there's a lot of pressure because of inflation. Gas prices are doing the roller coaster, as it happens during the summer most times anyway. Of course, inflation has brought people's activities and travel and other things to a halt, or at least minimized. So naturally, the fact that gasoline prices are coming down and have come down a little bit is simply because we're not using as much gas as we did. So the supply and demand fluctuations are taking place there. But here we are with the working poor with deciding about, I'm not making that. And business owners are having to decide, I can't expand. I can't buy an ad on the radio. I can't do other things that I'd like to do to expand my business because I got to pay my workers a little more money so they can get to work. And those are the things that are challenging small businesses right now. And we go back to the prebate for a minute, and we've talked about this before. Up to the poverty level, everybody gets the same amount of money based on the number of people in their household. And the folks that truly get impacted greatly by inflation, by high prices, by those types of fluctuations, benefit from the fair tax in spades based on their level that they're at. And you and I the same way. We'll get our money. And we can go spend that on whatever we want to, whatever we would consider to be an essential need.
Well, if you're a working poor, you're working 3 jobs, and if you have the fair tax, you will be bringing home 3 whole paychecks with no deductions and no payroll taxes and all that stuff. You have a lot more money in your pocket. But I tell you what, I cannot go 2 weeks in a row without getting into what the Congress critters are trying to do to the tax code here.
That's right. It's that time again.
Yes. There are a couple of... I'm not sure that any of these are Hall of Shame worthy, but there's some fairly interesting things here, including H.R. 8694 to amend the Internal Revenue Code to make notices of intent to operate under Section 501c4 publicly available in the same manner as applications for exemption from the tax. I will note that Section 501c4 and everything else in the tax code goes away with the fair tax.
Right. And that's the benefit. That's the untold. I mean, there's so many layers that get peeled off the onion of the income tax, pared down to just the basics. And you as an individual, me, folks out there watching, listening, you get to decide when you pay the tax. And folks say, well, we're probably not going to make as much money if we do it this way than we would with the income tax. That's just going to make it difficult for services and Medicare and Medicaid. And the point is that there will be many, many more, hundreds of millions more people paying the fair tax, paying a tax on consumption that there will be at the income tax. And so the challenge is going to be, what do you do with all this money? And that's where I think a lot of people are. So yes, you're right. All these proposals within the tax code you won't have that problem anymore.
Okay. Well, you mentioned earlier businesses trying to have to pay their employees more. Yeah. And that brings right into this one. This is H.R. 8675 to amend the Internal Revenue Code to provide an employer credit for increasing wages. That's all I've got. I don't have any text on that, but this is Representative Ruiz from California to amend the Internal Revenue Code to provide an employer credit. So if you give somebody a raise, if this becomes law, you'll get a tax credit for it. How cool is that? One more real quick, because I want to get back to what we were talking about last week. That's just too good not to let go. And here's one that'll just make your blood boil. S 4768. A bill to amend the Internal Revenue Code to tax excess profits of large oil and gas companies, to impose a tax on the repurchase of stock by large oil and gas companies, to end the use of the LIFO, L-I-F-O method of accounting, which I have no clue what that is. Jade will have to explain that to me. To end that method of accounting by large oil and gas trades or businesses, and your favorite, for other purposes. There is so much wrong with that. Well, at what point does a profit become an excess profit? At what point does a large gas company become a large gas company? Who gets to make those determinations?
Right.
Oh,
Well,
that's crazy.
you
That's
have to have, I
Senator.
mean, you talk about Jade Wally and you talk about folks that have the brains the size of that alien on Star Trek, the first one, with the big, I mean, that think through all of these things. And we're just simple people. Hey, we want to go home and grill a hamburger and
Yeah.
a living and save some money and put our kids through college and it's just this Internal Revenue Service, the whole income tax thing. It really is, and because of what we're getting ready to talk about and what we talked about last week and what you and Jay talked about the week before, what the Internal Revenue Service is getting ready to become supersized.
I think you're
supersized
IRS. I think you're thinking of Mr. Spock. Live long and prosper.
Yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Okay. Well,
I mean, he was very analytical. He was a very analytical person. I would love to have had that character around in high school while I was trying to figure out trigonometry. But anyway,
I found trigonometry pretty easy, but
yes,
who knows?
I
Okay. We'll check more of what the Congress critters are up to next week on Fairtax Power Radio. But let's get back to what we were talking about. I want to ask you something. Did you see the job posting that the IRS put up that they have since taken down? They were looking for people to work in their criminal investigation division who are willing to use deadly force. That they were, we're going to have part of your job description is that you will carry a firearm and you must be willing to use deadly force if necessary. They've taken that down. But that's the kind of IRS that's getting another $80 billion.
Well, and the thing is that deadly force description was in the law enforcement division posting, the criminal investigation section. I looked at that and I'm going, wait a minute. As a special agent, you will combine your accounting skills with law enforcement skills to investigate financial crimes. No matter what the source, all income earned, both legal and illegal, has the potential of becoming involved in crimes which fall within the investigative jurisdiction of the Internal Revenue Service criminal investigation. Sounds like that sounds like they're mixing peas with carrots to me, because the expertise required to conduct these complex financial investigations, the IRS special agents are considered the premier financial investigators for the federal government, not just within necessarily the activities of collecting taxes, I would think. The major duties listed in the job description included a level of fitness necessary to effectively respond to life-threatening situations on the job and being willing and able to participate in arrests, execution of search warrants, and other dangerous assignments. It also included the requirement of carrying a firearm and be willing to use deadly force if necessary.
Yes, and that's your kinder, gentler IRS that's now going to be $80 billion richer than it was. How crazy is that?
The Twitterverse just exploded because of that whole commentary, that whole and folks are going, wait a minute, and you said it last week that on the social media on Facebook, it was how are we going to people are waking up, how are we going to get around what is going on, and is this something that can be stopped, and are there enough people now that are waking up to are you awake? I'm asking our listeners and our people that watch us on the YouTube channel and on Facebook every week. Are you awake to this now? And here's where you can help us out. You start the conversation with your friends. Call your representatives that are in Congress now and say, this is ridiculous. We need this has got to help us. We've got, and this isn't a Republican or Democrat thing. This is an income thing. We know from our experience and understanding of what the fair tax is, we know that there is a better way, a more simpler and fair way to do this, to collect revenue for the operation of our federal government. And it's much better than the income tax. And I always say this, hey, guess what? I don't know what it was like before there was an income tax, but there was a time before it was an income tax. And we're sitting here now going, this is the way to get back to that.
Before you get too far away from that last point you were making about, did you see the report several weeks ago where the IRS had spent, if I'm remembering the number correctly, something like $700,000 worth of ammo that they have bought up?
Yeah.
So that's why you can't walk into Rural King and find ammo anymore, because the IRS has bought it all.
Right.
And now they're advertising for agents who are willing to use deadly force as necessary. And this is the agency that the government has just given $87 billion more to. And people are finally waking up to the fact, we don't want this. We got to get rid of it. The only way you're going to get rid of it is to get rid of the income tax and pass the fair tax. How do you get rid of the IRS? You pass the fair tax. It's that simple.
And I think because we talk about a cursory understanding and just a sort of we're talking about taxes. Oh, okay. Well, what about the flat tax? Because the flat tax gets talked about and sometimes in the same breath with the fair tax.
And you're missing one word there. Instead of flat tax, it's flat income tax. Now continue.
Correct. But you know what I'm saying. And
oh yeah.
Most people will look at that and go, oh, it's about it's kind of like the same thing. And it really isn't. It's the difference between night and day with regard to the activity and the process. And our fair tax plan has been formulated over 20 plus years, spending $15, $20 $22 million.
The history of it is that there were these very wealthy businessmen in Houston, Texas, who had spent an all-day meeting talking about the tax ramifications of the various decisions they could make rather than how to move their business forward. And it dawned on them, there has to be a better way, which was the title of our Wally's World episode a couple of weeks ago. So they had the wherewithal to do it. They hired a team of crack economists, gave them a blank sheet of paper and says, come up with the best tax system you possibly can that funds the government at its current level, does the least amount of economic damage, is the most efficient, is just the best tax system you could possibly come up with. Here's a blank sheet of paper, figure it out. What they came up with was not called the fair tax right out of the box, but it was, it picked up that name later. So what we've got is the fair tax is $20 million worth of research 20 years ago. So add inflation to that, it's probably close to $30 million in today's dollars that this team of economists spent putting the fair tax together. And they said, all right, let's get rid of the Internal Revenue Service. Let's make this progressive by putting in the prebate. And let's just tax consumption and not make any exemptions and loopholes and deductions and stuff that people use to avoid paying their fair share. And they set the rate to bring in the exact same amount of that the government was getting at the time. And that's what the fair tax is. That's how you get rid of the income tax and get rid of the IRS.
Right. And as you think through to the next part of that is how quickly could something like this come about if everybody that's listening to our program called their representative tomorrow morning and said, you need to put the brakes on this thing. We are not going to go for this. And we have a solution. It's called the fair tax, and make it that simple and let whoever they talk to at their representatives other end of the phone. And because I know that if we all did this tomorrow morning, if you get up and make your phone calls, you call your senators, and you call your representative in the House, and you say, this ain't going to work. We have a solution. It's called the fair tax. And at the end of the day, the paper goes in and the guy that's answering the phone is going, oh my gosh, we've got all these people calling in. It really can turn a corner for something to happen right away. But Bob, I want to ask you a question. That once the reality hits the once the skid is greased enough to put the boat in the water, how quickly can it be affected? And we know that when it goes through the House, it's going to be debated and things are going to change. We know it's not going to be a pure fair tax like we see it. What's it going to look like?
Well, I don't think there'll be that many changes to it, actually, because it's pretty good the way it is. And every objection that someone raises to the fair tax, we've been able to effectively handle so far. Well, the only thing that I see that might get messed with is that people would look at the prebate as an entitlement and they'd want to means test it. So rather than everybody getting the prebate, only the above a certain income level, they wouldn't do it. But that really I don't think would work, because under the fair tax, how much money you make is no longer any of the government's business. How are they going to means test it when they don't know how much you make?
You're going to have to put it on a postcard, and now we're back to the flat tax.
Oh, no, we don't need that. But I think that once, and I think we've got an opportunity here. We, being fair tax volunteers around the country, have got an opportunity here that's unprecedented in my time volunteering with a fair tax. This is the first time I've ever seen social media blowing up saying, we don't want 87,000 new IRS agents. We don't want a much bigger, much meaner, much badder IRS than we've got now. Because I say we've been talking about this for years, about the abuses that the IRS engages in, how they violate the Bill of Rights. And then we've just gotten the collective yawn from folks. But I think the fact that they have they're talking about a $14 billion agency becoming over an $80 billion agency, that's 6 times bigger than it is now. And people are finally realizing, wait a minute, we don't want this. And how do we get rid of it? And the answer to how do we get rid of it is pass the fair tax. And as you mentioned it, you got to call your representatives, you got to call your senators. But actually, what you really need to do is to elect fair tax people to office in the first place. It's a lot easier to elect someone who already supports the fair tax than it is to change somebody's mind who's already up there and, eating at the political trough up there that corrupts everyone that goes to Washington.
So the chess game that you play from winning back to the position that you're at. And so the chess game for us is, in the short term, we have several states that still have primaries. We have the general election in November, and we have incumbents. So we have a perfect storm of opportunity to say, okay, let's go ahead and call our representatives now and say, listen here, we're not having any of this $87 billion Internal Revenue Service thing going on. We have the answer. It's the fair tax. Time is of the essence. What are you going to do about it? If they give you the answer that you want to hear, then you need to hold their feet to the fire, send them a pledge, say, we really want to see this happen now. Now, the next step is to go to their opponent and say, what do you think about it? Ask them the same question. We're not going to stand for this, or it's going to come down to a point in November. I can't get my fingers together because I'm watching it on TV. We come down to the point where it's November. This is when it happens. If it can't happen that quickly, sliding a foot into a flip-flop for going to the beach, or sliding a loafer on your feet to go to church in the morning, if you can't make it happen in that nice, swift way to get either the incumbent on board or their opponent on board coming up this fall, then I really am engaged. I'm really asking our listeners and our viewers, please engage in this. If there's no other opportunity for you to say, hey, this is what I did for my kids and my grandkids. And I say this all the time to my children. I haven't done a whole lot in this world, but boy, I sure hope that we can see this through to the finish line to help out the generations that come beyond us and let them experience what it was like for our great grandparents and our grandparents in the fact that there wasn't an income tax. And we'll take care. Believe me, the tax on consumption is going to take care, even in a greater amount of revenue coming into the Treasury. Then the debate will be on, let's get rid of the debt and start taking care of those things that we have come accustomed to like our retirement plans and the Medicare and things that will help society. It's going to come down to this. It's coming down to this election. I think I don't think there's a better time for it.
Well, I remember last time I looked, out of 435 members of the House, the HR 25, the fair tax bill, has 29 co-sponsors.
Right.
Now, it came out a couple of weeks ago. Marjorie Taylor Greene came out on Twitter that she says we need to, don't give us these 87,000 IRS agents. It's time to pass the fair tax. Last time I looked, she was not one of those 25. So somebody in her district needs to get her on board on that anyway.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's what's got to happen. And real quickly, we only got a couple of minutes left of this episode. Let me steer people to fairtax.org. There is an amazing amount of information there at fairtax.org. Starting point, I would open up the FAQ and just read it top to bottom. We went through the whole thing here, it's a while back there on FairTax Power Radio. It took us a couple episodes to get through it all, and we didn't begin to get through it all. So there is a lot of good information on how the fair tax works, what it does, and there's some research under there. Jade Wiley has a paper that says the fair tax would eliminate 95% of the current tax evasion problem, which is the reason that they've given us for wanting all these new IRS agents, because they have to fight evasion. Well, if you want to fight evasion, get rid of the 87,000 IRS agents and enact the fair tax, and you do it in one fell swoop. So send people to fairtax.org. and check that out. There's a way to get involved. There's lots of information there. And I say I'm just about out of time, so I can't tell you no more about it. Just go out and check it out for yourself.
Yeah, fairtax.org/FAQ. Never file an individual federal tax return again.
I love it. And real quick, as far as federal tax return, it just came out of the appeals court, is now saying that Donald Trump has to turn over his tax returns. So hopefully we could get him on board. Hey, let's just get a system that doesn't have any more tax returns. So you get rid of the IRS, you get rid of tax returns, you get rid of withholding, you get rid of payroll taxes, you get rid of so much nasty stuff when you replace the income tax with the fair tax. And that's going to wrap up this edition of FairTax Power Radio. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Again, we encourage you to share these videos with your families and friends. But until we meet again, let me remind you one more time, as we always do, that I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Bob Scarborough.
And we are the FAIRtax Guys. And we will tell you until the day we draw our last breath that the fair tax is the only truly fair tax. And once you understand it,
you'll demand it.
So tell me, how could I pay less taxes?
Less.
Yeah, I'm trying to get ahead, so how can I pay less?
Well, I suppose you could pay less taxes by earning less money, or you could give to charity.
How is that going to help?
Actually, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but if you know the right people, okay, or if you have a really good lawyer, you can usually get around the big ones.
If I may. Under the fair tax, to pay less taxes, you would simply consume less. You would control how much you pay and when you pay your taxes simply by choosing what you purchase and when you purchase something.
So I could stay focused and get ahead.
Exactly.